Yeah, I got COVID and I'm used to eating right before I speak. We're continuing on with 1 Peter and our call as a church to mission. How comfortable would any of us feel if today, instead of coming to a service at St. Paul's, you walked into a worship service at a mosque or a Jewish synagogue? First, you probably wouldn't know if you were just welcome to go into a mosque or a synagogue. Do I need an invitation? How should I dress? Will they speak English so I can understand? Will the service be in Arabic or Hebrew? What should I do and when? Will everyone there know me as a visitor and look at me with that suspicious look? These people who stand at the door saying hello to me, are they really bouncers or bodyguards in disguise? Looking to make sure that no one unwanted comes into the service? I don't think any of us would feel comfortable going into such a foreign environment like that as a mosque or synagogue without at least having a friend, maybe, who could stand by our side and say, I'm going to be there for you. And I'll help you and make you feel comfortable. We would still really have to trust the person, though, who is inviting us, that they have our best interests at heart in inviting us. But can you imagine, though, this same friend inviting you then to a mosque or synagogue and suddenly left you during the middle of the service to sit next to someone else that they knew, and then after the service ignored you as if you didn't even kind of exist, being very indifferent to you? Or your friend speaks to their fellow worshipers about how you are trying to get your life back together again after becoming a big failure. And you want to check out how being Islam or Jewish can help you from feeling like a complete failure in life. Kind of out of a spirit of arrogance and self-righteousness. Or even worse, during the service everyone kneels during prayers and you have your eyes closed and didn't see them do so, and you're standing all by yourself, and someone later comes up to you and mentions how disrespectful you were for not kneeling or acting properly. You feel judged. Instead of experiencing grace, you experience those who look perfect and are quite smug in their own goodness. Instead of experiencing people with a humble spirit or engaged in your needs as an outsider, you experience arrogance and indifference. Instead of compassion and love, you feel judged how your life has turned out. The sad truth is that many people in our culture have this view of coming to a Christian church. They feel the same attending our church service as we would do if we were to attend a mosque or a synagogue service. Many people come into the Christian church, instead of being engaged as valuable, have found the church indifferent to their life. Instead of people experiencing humility from Christians, they have found them to be arrogant. Instead of experiencing Christians as people full of compassion and love, non-Christians have felt judgment from Christians. Instead of grace givers, Christians have come across as people who are self-righteous. How should we respond? Our text today helps us to be very practical in response to people who are not familiar with the church or the Christian faith. The focus of the words we've heard from Peter actually have very little to do with services, do they? Or activities held at a church building. Much more how to do with how Christians are to act towards each other and our neighbors. Tim Chester summarizes Peter's mission strategy in saying that at the heart of this mission strategy are not services, courses, programs, and activities, but ordinary lives lived for God's glory. Mission takes place not through attractional events, but through attractional communities. How do we become an attractional community at St. Paul's? Peter's first focus is that the end of all things is near. What does that mean? Even pastors have to wrestle through the text at times. This truth is meant to help us, he says, be clear-minded and self-controlled so that we can focus our thoughts in prayer to God. What does he mean when he says the end of all things is near? Well, the word end in the original language can also mean the word goal. The goal of all things is near. What I believe Peter is reminding Christians is that in Jesus, the purposes of God's mission in our world have been completed by Jesus. That he's not going to suddenly send another Jesus to do something new. As God's Son, Jesus has lived a perfect life, willingly gave his life on the cross for our wrongs we've done in life. Jesus, through God's power, resurrected from death and demonstrated Christ's power over death. Jesus ascended to the right hand of God as a symbol of the authority Jesus has over all things in our world. Why? Peter reminds us in his text. He wants us to bring us back home in God's presence eternally. That was the work of Jesus. What Peter, I believe, is emphasizing is that Jesus has accomplished all that God's mission on earth needed to have done so that we could have fellowship with God and the purpose God intended us to have in life. There's only one aspect of Jesus' mission that has not happened yet. That's why Peter points us forward still. That is Jesus coming again to judge the world, whether they believed in the good news now of the work of Jesus or not. This is Peter's focus, that Christians need to live as if Jesus will come back any moment. It's like an engaged couple longing for their wedding day. The love is there already. The relationship is there. But the reality of them officially being husband and wife hasn't happened yet. This creates a sense of urgency in our lives as we think about following Jesus before it's too late. Peter calls us to love each other deeply because love covers over a multitude of sins. This love Peter mentions is the love we talked about last week, that's willing to suffer for another or seeks the good of another before our own interests. This is the love of Christ, Peter mentions, displayed for us in his mission in our world. This sacrificial love needs to be forefront in our lives as we relate to one another. Peter states that this love is the love that covers over a multitude of sins. If our children wrong us because we love them, we don't instantly kick them out of the house over the first offense, do we? No, out of love, we discipline them, but we don't cut off all relationship and harsh judgment over them. This is how Peter wants us to see Christian love, as a love that's slow to anger and harsh judgment, and suffers through offenses, believing that the love of God displayed towards one another will prevail to win their hearts and over the sin. Proverbs 10:12, which I believe Peter is kind of referencing there, speaks of hatred stirs up dissension, breaking down relationships that would break two people apart. But love covers those wrongs and keeps them from falling apart. Next, Peter encourages Christians to be people who practice hospitality without grumbling. Hospitality. I like the definition of hospitality that you have on the front of your bulletin this morning. Hospitality is when someone feels at home in your presence. When we think of hospitality, we think of one person being a host and another person being a guest. With hospitality comes certain etiquette of how a host and a guest should act towards each other. For instance, a host wouldn't welcome a guest into their home and expect the guest to prepare a meal for the host. No, the host would try to provide everything needed for the guest to have a memorable visit. Likewise, a guest who's invited into a host's home wouldn't start criticizing everything about the house. It's messy. Your plates look like they were bought from a thrift store. In biblical times, when Peter wrote these words, hospitality was a very big deal in their society and culture. In fact, God is a gracious host, It was one of the key ways people viewed their relationship with God. In our responsive reading, we have a great example when we looked at famous Psalm 23. David writes about God as a shepherd host in the psalm. David says of God, "You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil," which is a symbol in biblical times of being an honored guest. "My cup overflows," which meant when you were in the host's presence, everything you would need would be provided, even abundantly overflowing. "Surely," he says, "your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life." God gives us eternal hospitality. "And I will dwell in your house, Lord, forever." One of my favorite hymns is written by an older man a long time ago, Isaac Watts. And he writes on Psalm 23, he has this great verse, it's one of my favorite verses. "Your sure provisions, gracious God, attend me all my days. Oh, may your house be my abode, and all my work be praised. Here may I find a settled rest, while others go and come. No more a stranger, no more a guest, but like a child at home." God is our host, and we are his guests in life. Peter calls us to practice this hospitality to one another without grumbling. What happens when a grumbling person comes into a room? Do any of us get excited when we encounter a grumbling person? When we see hospitality as a reflection of God's character and mission in our lives, we need to see our grumbling as a complaint against who? Against God. One person reflecting on this passage spoke of the consequences of grumbling as a complaint against God and his ordering of our circumstances. And this result, when we grumble, it drives out faith, he says. That trust that God will take care of you. It drives out thanksgiving. We miss many of the blessings we already have in life. And it drives out joy. We become miserable people, only focusing on what we're lacking. So how do we practice hospitality without grumbling? Where someone can feel at home in our presence. First, we've been studying how as Christians now in Canada, that we are now the outsiders in our society. We are the outsiders who are not the hosts anymore. Many years though, Christians in Canada especially have been acting as hosts, expecting people we encounter to abide by our house rules. But we're now guests in our culture. We need to change our thinking. We have to learn how to be good guests. As non-Christians invite us into our lives, we need to see that's such a privilege and a gift that they're inviting us to speak into their lives. Just as a guest wouldn't enter a host's home and act honorably and respectfully towards their host, we too as Christians need to see opportunities of sharing Jesus to our host culture as a gift, from the host to the guest. And we should not trample down our host with that spirit of arrogance, judgment, indifference, or even self-righteousness. Acting like a guest can be hard for us pastors. My temptation is to act like I have all the answers to all the questions of life, and I should be able to solve everybody's difficulties that I encounter. But when I act as a guest, I know I can be vulnerable as well, as a person in need of answers myself, and share graciously how much I need Jesus in my life at all times, in every situation. I wanted you to try an example of how to be hospitable guests in your life. And I want you to try this activity. I want you to think of all the daily activities that you do daily, whether it's traveling to work eating meals, walking the dog, chores. Then also I want you to think of your weekly routine, whether it's grocery shopping, watching your favorite television programs, or exercising, playing computer games. You should come up probably with a very long list of activities. For each one, I want you to add something. See how you can do your weekly and daily routines with the community component by involving another member of your Christian community. Then I want you to think of how you can do that missionally, a missional component by involving an unbeliever. And lastly, think about how you can do one of those components by identifying opportunities to just talk graciously about Jesus and what he means in your life. I'm going to stop there because I have a practical example in my own life. A lot of you know I like to go for walks. Usually I like to go for walks in the woods because I can be by myself and then I'm not afraid of what people are going to look at me and think what I'm doing. But where I usually go for a walk in the woods, the bugs have been horrible this summer. So I've been forced to go walking over here on the trail where everybody walks their dogs. And it's kind of not, it's very crowded, put it that way. There's a lot of dogs, especially because of the dog park. As I was walking, though, one day, I was reflecting by the river, and I even had a song playing on my phone. This man comes up with his dog, because this is where his dog swims all the time. And I started developing a relationship with him. And we started talking, and of course he asked me what I did for work, and I told him I was a pastor. And he shared how he grew up kind of connected with the church, but he was trying to get back to it. We talked and talked and talked. And we just started developing a relationship. And so we decided let's get together for coffee. Now, you know me, I don't drink coffee. But I'm more the concept of getting together with someone. So we decided to do that again. And it didn't work out. So it kind of came up with the idea, well, why don't we go for a walk together again? And then he could take his dog. And he's a wonderful dog, a wonderful German Shepherd, right now. And that's what we did. And as we talked, we just walked together and we just talked about life and my struggles and his struggles. And it was like two people on a journey together. And that's how our mission, and we can be as missional, that everybody can be involved in mission. It doesn't have to be just the ministers. Tim Chester reminds us that Christians who practice hospitality is for every Christian. Everyday mission, he says, requires everyday missionaries rather than superheroes of the faith. We need to recapture the sense that gospel ministry is not something done by pastors with the support of ordinary Christians, but it's something done by ordinary Christians with the support of pastors. Peter states that all Christians have been given gifts. These gifts, if you were to look at the Greek, they're literally called grace gifts. That God equips us to serve others as an outpouring of His grace in our lives. Peter doesn't give a specific list, but he divides the grace gifts into two main categories: speaking about Jesus and serving others. Implied is that all followers of Jesus are given gifts to be used to bring praise and glory to God in our world. If our heart's desire is to serve God in life, God will give you the strength and the gifts to share God's hospitality to others. We as a church need to start seeing ourselves as guests in Ingersoll. When our community invites us into their lives, let's act as guests and see how the gift our host gives for us to share the hope and purpose in life that we have in Jesus. I'm going to invite the praise team to come on up now. We're going to do